I'm going to try to go through a full year of beekeeping, what it looks like. And we're going to start at the beginning as if you never had a hive before. We're going to start as if you're getting a nuke. And it's safe to say, especially when you get nukes from us, and if you get our West Virginia nukes that are coming with the queen that we're producing, you're going to get it sometime in May. Now, I say sometime in May because who knows what the weather's like? You know, who knows what our April is like? April can be a washout, it can be cold, or it can be warm, and things are rocking and rolling. But the thing to remember when you're getting nukes from us is, yeah, things start blooming in late March, April, but my bees got to build up. Then I split them, and then I hold on to the nukes for like three to 4 weeks, and then that's when you get them. That's when you get the nukes, right before they're about to bust at the seams and hatch out. And so the calendar, I'm going to go month by month all the way through, and this is how it is for my operation. This is how it is for everywhere I got bees, and this is how I do things. Not to say there's not other ways to do it, but I'm going to pinpoint like when I'm treating for mites and what I'm treating with to kind of show you what my thinking is behind why I do it this way. Okay, so we're going to start in May. So May is when your locust trees are blooming, give or take May 12th, May 13th, your locust trees are going to start blooming. And the poplar trees will be a week or two later, but those are your two biggest honey producers in this area. The locust gives you a real sweet, real clear honey, and the poplars is the exact opposite, very dark and kind of smoky. They're both delicious honeys, but when you get your nuke, this is what your nuke is growing off of. They're pulling the natural resources from those trees that are blooming, and they're growing off of them trees. And so the autumn olive has probably bloomed mid-April. Autumn olive, every landowner hates this stuff because it's an invasive, it grows everywhere, but beekeepers love it because that's like one of the first plants out there that they really start building off of is the autumn olive. So what I always say to people, if once they get their nuke, they take it home, you put it right in the middle of this hive. Don't separate frames, put them here and there, clump them together right in the middle, and you can feed right away. But you don't have to continue feeding, right? So feeding right away is just kind of keep them calm, get them acclimated, keep them there for a little bit, get them going. But then if the weather's right, meaning it's not just constantly raining, the bees can get out, they can go get the nectar and go get the pollen, you can just let them be. Just let them start growing. May is the exciting month. This is when things are booming. So just allow the natural resources to come in. You can never replace what's out there in nature. Like you can put sugar syrup on them, you can put pollen patties on them. Bees go through 60 to 70 pounds of pollen a year. You can put a little pollen patty on them. You're not doing too much. So do not put your second brood box on yet, which we run everything in double deeps. This is a single deep. Our hives are double deep, so two deeps. Don't put your second deep on yet. Wait to let them fill this out entirely. Don't give them, and the idea is don't give them too much space that they can't handle yet, right? Bees, they control the climate inside of there. Let them fill it out. And once they fill it out, put your second box on. And I say, if you're feeding, feed 3/4 to 1. So, and what I mean by that is 3/4 part sugar, 1 part water. And this is kind of a new thing, a new practice that I take, we do a lot. 3/4 to 1 helps them build comb, and it's more of a stimulant than even 1 to 1 is. And that's what we will start feeding. Well, I'll start feeding that as soon as the weather gets decent in March. That's when I'll put that on, but we'll get into that a little bit later. But 3/4 to 1 in early spring is what I recommend. It also saves you from going through so much sugar. And that, like I said, is only if the weather's bad, right? Otherwise, you don't have to feed. There's no reason to. Let them use the natural resources out there. So June, you're continuing your pollen and nectar flow, right? June is, the locust trees are done, poplars pretty much done. This is when you kind of start getting your clovers and what else is wrong? If you have knotweed around, knotweed, I should say. That'll be around. And then other things are blooming. Other people's flowers are blooming. But for your first year with getting your nuke, June is when you, at some point in June, you're gonna be adding that second box on. This is when this should be filled out. Should be time to put that second box on, let them continue growing up. Bees are always gonna wanna grow up, so that's why we put it on the top. And the biggest thing to watch when you're doing your hive inspections during this time, there's not much to do, but watch the queen production. And I put that picture of brood up there because you wanna see that queen filling it and keeping it tight. If she's getting spotty and patchy, she ain't keeping up. And the other thing to watch for is if the bees are backfilling it with honey, okay? What's happening is they're getting honey bound, is what they call it. And the queen's not keeping up. So the nurse bees are trying to keep an open space on that frame for the queen. And so she's laying, but nectar's coming in, it's coming in fast. The queen's not keeping up, and then they're backfilling the frame with honey. And then it's gonna cause swarming, right? She's running out of room. She's gonna run out of space really fast. And that's kind of rare, doesn't happen that often, but it's something to keep in mind. But always, in your hive inspections right now, you're just watching that queen production, making sure she's getting 4 or 5 frames of brood, make sure she's laying, make sure she's keeping up, because that's something to do. If she's not, you're gonna get rid of her. You're gonna get another one. So July, the nectar flow starts taping off. Now, this is gonna depend on what part of the county you're in, okay? In this part of the county, it's drying up. But if I got bees out in Paw Paw and on the western side of the county, basswood trees really start blooming end of June, early July, and it's a great honey. I mean, it kind of gives you the citrus style honey, but over here, there's just no basswood. Very few, I should say. Basswood really likes the bigger mountains, the steeper mountains, and that's where you'll find the basswood trees. So we have, in this area, a consistent pollen flow. So the pollen is what the bees need to keep raising young. Pollen's the biggest stimulant for the queen to lay her eggs. There's a consistent pollen flow, but not all pollen is created equal, okay? And what I mean by that is, you'll see the bees coming in, pollen on their legs. It's a good thing. The bees will use it, but there's not as much nutrients in it. So like, flower gardens or whatever, the bees are, getting the pollen. It's not giving them as much nutrients to raise good, healthy brood. So things start drying up, they start slowing down, and this is when you start thinking about feeding, okay? And when it's more towards the end of July that things are really dry. Usually early July, you're still good. There's still wildflowers out there, there's still clovers, and Dutch clover, I should say, is the one we're looking for. What's the purple clover? I don't even know what it's called. You have red clover. Bees can't get into it, so that stuff doesn't really matter to us. It's the Dutch clover that we like. But they're not gonna produce a lot, okay? So things will start drying up, and you're not just gonna get an abundance of resources. And what'll happen is, so they'll start building up and then get into that second box, and that sometimes all the frames won't all be drawn out. So they need some more help to finish drawing out their colony, or their hive, I should say. So this is when we really feed 1-to-1 sugar syrup. So if you notice, we went from 3/4 to 1 in the spring, now we're to 1-to-1. And how I measure my 1-to-1 is 1 5-gallon bucket of sugar, 1 5-gallon bucket of water. That's just 1-to-1. But yeah, and then July, we take serious on treating mites in July. So I always say July is actually when the beekeeper's calendar starts, because what you do in July, August is going to dictate how your winters go, how your spring's going to happen for the health of the colony. So I say start taking mite counts, and I should have brought my little cup along, but I forgot it today. We use an alcohol wash for our mite counts. That's what I find to be the most accurate. They do sugar rolls where it's powdered sugar. I don't find that to be too accurate. I just like the mite wash, and the only reason why some people don't like it is because you kill the bees that you're testing, because you essentially put them in, it's 2 different cups. One's got a bunch of holes in it, and you put a 1/4 cup of alcohol, rubbing alcohol in it, you put a cup of bees into the other one and swish it around, and all the mites are going to fall off of the bees that are in there, and then you can see how many mites at the bottom of the cup. And might I say, when you do your mite counts, test nurse bees. Don't test bees that are up on honey frames, because that's not giving you the accuracy that you want. The nurse bees that are on the comb, that's where all your mites are. On the brood comb, that's where all the mites are, because the mites are hiding in the brood and behind the brood cappings. That's going to give you your most accurate counts. But from July on, this is when you're always thinking mites. You're watching inside. When you do your hive inspections, you get in, you're looking for deformed wing virus. You're doing your mite checks. And I'm not saying you have to do it every hive inspection, which I say to do a hive inspection every 10 days to every other week. But at least once a month, just be watching. And so end of July is when we would treat Apivar, which is Amitraz. And the reason before that is that's a 6-week treatment, and that's 2 brood cycles. So in September, I don't know if you remember from 2 classes ago, was it? Yeah. That's when the bees start raising wintertime bees. So you want the bees raising the wintertime bees to be healthy. So that's why we treat when we do in July, to try to clean up the nest a little bit, get the mites down, manage that stressor on the bees, so that when they start raising your wintertime bees, you're getting the most nutritious, healthiest bees you can get. What's next? So August, once again, we're doing more mite counts. And this is when things are really, really dry. We're always feeding in August around here. There's just nothing coming in for the bees. And, I use them buckets on top. They're 2 gallons. When it's bad, the bees can burn through that 2 gallons in like 3 days. So, I'm not saying you got to feed every 3 days. Usually I'm always on an every other week schedule with my hives by the time I make it all the way around. And I'm feeding, and then it's also to note, if they're packed out with honey in the second brood box, right? Be mindful of how much you're feeding, because you may not have to feed if that top box is full of honey. You may not have to feed that much. You're just what you don't want is them to burn through all that honey, because that's what they're going to get through winter on, right? So just feed to just keep them from using all their resources already, because nothing more is really coming in. And we would still feed 1-to-1 syrup. And so in August, you'll start seeing the early goldenrod pop up. That's what them yellow stalky flowers are in the back. A lot of people complain about them because they say they got allergies off of them. But goldenrod, there's actually no allergies you can get off of goldenrod. It's actually, I think it's ragweed or something. It's another plant that looks just like it. That's what you're actually getting your allergies off of. But goldenrod, we like goldenrod as beekeepers. Bees love it, and you'll know it when bees are bringing in goldenrod honey, because people say it smells like sweaty feet, like that odor from it. Some people I got some customers that they always asking me for goldenrod honey. I don't like it personally, because I think it's kind of bitter. It doesn't taste like sweaty feet, but it just kind of has a bitter taste to it. It's real dark honey. But what I do not like about my bees overwintering on goldenrod honey is it crystallizes very, very fast. So the honey, when they store it away, and honey will crystallize a lot faster in cold temperatures. So when the bees are trying to get through wintertime and they're feeding on the stuff and it's all hard, it's not the best thing for them. And it's a dark honey, which is also going to affect their guts a little bit. So I like the goldenrod to once again, prolong them from using wintertime stores that they made in June, if that makes sense. Try to keep them from eating it. And I'll just keep feeding a little bit. And like I said, you can't stop it from coming in. It's going to come in, but just be mindful of that. And any honey that comes off of a flower is going to crystallize a lot faster than anything that comes off of a tree. Tree honeys, they don't crystallize a lot. I don't know all the science behind it, but that's just the way it is. I always know when I got clover honey mixed in with basswood, the basswood's going to crystallize super fast because of that clover honey that's mixed into it. because like I said, basswood is late June, early July. You know, your Dutch clover's everywhere at the same time too. It's all kind of coming in together. And I mean, a basswood honey's delicious. Like I said, it has like a citrus flavor to it, but it crystallizes a little bit too fast for my liking, just because of the clover honey that's in it. So let me back up a little bit. With July and August, keep in mind, if you're gonna treat formic acid, this is not the time to treat formic acid, because formic acid is temperature sensitive, right? So obviously July, August, that's our hot months. You got, I think it's 86 degrees, don't quote me on that, it might be 90 degrees, that you don't want to use it if the temperatures go above that. Well, if it's 90 degrees outside, what's the temperature inside that box? 105, I don't know, it's a lot hotter than that. So, and it'll cause the bees to abscond, it'll cause your, they say you can lose up to 10% of your bees on it. That might go way up if the temperature is way higher than that. So I'd never recommend using formic acid, and then thymol, which is Apogard. Using that in this time can be very deadly too, at the high doses that they recommend. So some people I know will cut it in half because, and the reason why people will play with it is because they want to stay organic. They don't want to use the Apovar, which is a synthetic, and I totally get it. But this is where the Apovar kind of holds its value, because you can use it at these temperatures at this time of the year and be totally fine. So September, continue feeding if necessary. Goldenrod should be popped up everywhere. And another thing to note with goldenrod, it doesn't always produce something in our area. It'll produce a little bit. Sometimes it ain't really much of anything to worry about. Take mite counts again. So if you did treat Apovar in late July, August, don't think it worked. I mean, we hope it worked, but don't guarantee it. Because I've had multiple times where I've used it and it seems like it did absolutely nothing. So now you're thinking, what else can I do? So you've got your September temperatures, you might be able to hit them with something else if it's cooler. So if you gotta feed, this is when I start switching to 2-to-1. Make your syrup a lot thicker. So you're gonna burn through the sugar if your hive needs it this time of year. They're really gonna be consuming a lot, because 2-to-1, they can take it and then put it away a lot faster. You know, it's a lot more, they can store it away as honey a lot faster. It'll look just like honey, even though it's sugar syrup. So once again, watch the queen. If the brood nest, and so the bees are gonna start making the nest the way they want it to be for wintertime. Okay, so they're gonna start situating everything inside this hive the way it needs to be. And what you're gonna do as a steward of these things is just make sure they're doing it. So, and what I do is I like to try to consolidate it. If I get into a hive and I see you got brood frames over here and brood frames on this side, and it's kind of just all scattered all over the place, well, I'm gonna take it upon myself to try to condense them and get them down, and then try to move the honey. I'll try to help them out to try to get it to where it needs to be. So you want the honey above them, because what the bees are gonna do, if you have them in the center, the cluster will then, as they shut down their brood production, they'll start moving as a whole cluster throughout the hive, feeding on the frames, and then they wanna go up and they'll work around. So you try to situate them. They'll naturally do it on their own, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes you gotta step in and kind of get them situated to where they can cluster up properly when the cold weather hits. So combining weaker colonies, something I do every single year. So if you just got 2, 3, 4 nukes for the spring and one's not doing that great, kill off the queen that's not doing that great and combine it with another one. It's better that one makes it through booming than you lose them both. It's a tool that I use all the time, because you're gonna bolster that one when the one's probably not gonna make it anyway. Bolster it up, because then in the spring you can split them again. Now you get it right back later. So I'll continue combining. I'll start in September and I'll continue all throughout October. So continue feeding 2-to-1 sugar syrup if it's necessary. So if you get to your colony, and I have this every year, somewhere, somehow, the bees have burned through their June stores and, you know, don't really have a full explanation why, but you got to be mindful of it. And how I know, obviously, get in there, see the frames, or you just tilt the hive and feel how heavy it is, because honey is extremely heavy. You won't be able to move the hive if it's full of honey. But we like our hives to be around that 160 to 180 pounds going into wintertime. So if they're a lot lighter than that, you really got to start dumping that 2-to-1 sugar syrup on them for them to store away for their wintertime feed. So the brood nest will continue to shrink down, and the Carniolans, I've seen them have, like, you know, a brood frame, you know, the pattern be like the size of my hand. That's what they'll kind of dwindle down to. You know, you'll go from 5, 6, 7 frames of brood all the way down to just like the size of your hand. That's just, they're shutting down for the year. And then this is when I start OA, oxalic acid vapor treatment. I'll start it in the end of October, early November. And that's kind of something I do that not too many other guys do. I started a lot earlier because, you know, they're shrinking, they're almost broodless, some might be broodless, but that's when oxalic acid vapor works. It does not work when there's a lot of brood in that hive, because it does not kill the mites behind the cap brood, which is where the majority are, but it's still shrunk enough. I start hitting them with oxalic acid vapor at this time. And then add your inner covers on. So I don't know what type of hive structure everybody else has, but this is my inner cover. Simple double bubble. This I found to be, in my personal work, it's the best insulation, I should say condensation barrier, because the condensation is going to build up on top of that and not let it drip down on top of the colony. So moving on. So in end of October, early November, if your hive has a high mite count, this is when absconding happens. This is when the bees are the mites are too high, running rampage. And I don't have an explanation for why the bees do it at this time, but I feel like my theory is they're trying to get the brood nest right. You know, they're trying to get it ready for wintertime, and they just can't. The mites are bugging them, so they just decide, heck with it, we're leaving. And they're gonna go try to find a new home, but it's ultimately always their demise. Like, they're not gonna make it in time to build up a new nest. So if your colony has a high mite count, they're either gonna abscond this time or they're gonna die in this time. If your bees are diseased, typically it's that November, December time when they leave or die off. I'll continue. The hive will be pretty much broodless come November. Now, it's never guaranteed because our falls are weird, right? Our falls can be hot all the way to December, or sometimes this fall wasn't too bad. We had some like early November days in the 20s where it just kind of shut things down. But once they go totally broodless, definitely I always recommend hit them with oxalic acid vapor again. And I hit oxalic acid vapor 2 to 3 times every winter time. So once again, be mindful of your condensation in your hive, but I use that double bubble, which is very cheap stuff, and it really takes care of your condensation problem. So December, this is when you ain't got much to do. Now, the reason why I say I do it a little differently by starting oxalic acid in end of October, most people will say start it early December, which they're not wrong. I mean, I get it. That's when your hive's broodless. But if you haven't done it end of October, I highly recommend thinking about doing it in early December. Hit them with oxalic acid vapor because they absolutely are totally broodless. Everything's shut down. You want to do it on a day that's about 50 degrees out, because the reason behind it is the bees are going to cluster up, right? They cluster and they're buzzing, they're rotating in and out, keeping it warm in there. You don't want that. You don't want to come in and hit oxalic acid vapor when they're balled up so tight that the vapor's not even penetrating and getting up through. You kind of want a loose cluster that the vapor does its job, gets all the way through the hive and gets them mites. Really watch condensation. I always find December is when mice try to get in. I don't know why December, but That's when the mice are trying to crawl in, and somehow they sneak in and they'll build a nest on the outside frame. Bees, won't even touch them. And the only reason why that's a problem is because they're chewing up your comb, and comb is gold to a beekeeper. So that's whenever some people will put mice guards on or whatever else, whether you just put some screening on it to keep the mice out. So January, so January starts the time. If your bees start dying in January, February, March, it's probably going to be one of two things. One, condensation. Two, they starved. And January, and the reason why it's been tricky for me over the years to try to figure out the best way to get my hives through the winter time that I don't have anything starving. And it's because we get these hot and cold days. Like right now, we're in a warm spell. The bees are active. Anytime the temperatures start getting above 55, 60, the bees will start coming out, getting active, and when they get active, they get hungry. So they start burning through all their wintertime stores. So this is when I start being mindful of how heavy the hive is. So I'll go around, I'll be monitoring, just doing a quick lift around as I check my bees. And sometimes I'll just dump dry sugar on the top just in case, I'll put it right on top of this double bubble, and that's why my lids all have this 1/2-inch shim on them, so I can just set it right back down and not mess with it. And what'll happen is, so bees need water to take down the dry sugar. But what'll happen is, this thing's a condensation barrier. All your condensation's gonna form up on top of it. Sugar's gonna absorb it all, and now the bees can take it. But sugar's not the only feed that you have to use. You can use fondant. Fondant's a great feed for them. It's a lot easier for the bees to take down. I don't, because I'm not feeding this number of colonies fondant. Fondant can be quite the pain to work with. It's like cake icing. I think a lot of cake decorators use it. I don't know how they use it, but they use it in a way to, yeah. I mean, you can feed bees a lot of different things. You can feed them, I've seen people feeding them Sour Patch Kids, marshmallows. I don't recommend it, but you can. Gummy bears. No, I don't use powder. And the funny thing also about the different sugars, brown sugar, if the bees take it, I've never tried it, it'll kill them. And that's a whole kind of like a whole nother rabbit hole of why, but regular, beet sugar, cane sugar is the best to use. Go to Costco, go to a Sam's Club, get 25-pound bags of sugar, and feed them that way. So February, I do another round of OA vapor every year. I go around, I should have said, typically, I'll make sure I do it in end of October, November. I'll do it again Christmas, into January, depends on if I get them all, and I'll try to do it again in February, and just really trying to clean house. So, and it's the only time of year that you can do it because the bees are broodless. So, end of February, early March, really watch for starvation. This is especially when it happens to a lot of people. You made it to February, you're almost to spring, you think you finally made it, and then they starved. Because the weather's, it's starting to kick off, and they get active. You can't help it. It's just, you just gotta be mindful of it and try to keep the sugar on them just as an emergency. And get ready for spring yourself. This time of year is when I'm spending all my time in the wood shop, building stuff, getting stuff ready, getting my sugar inventory together. That way I'm ready to rock and roll come March. So March, this frame right here is a brood frame in my hive on March 1st. So it's early, right? The weather still can be, still is iffy, regardless in that early March time frame, but that's taken in early March. And the first tree typically that blooms is your maple trees, and you'll start seeing red pollen come in on the bees' legs, and pollen's the biggest stimulant for that queen to lay. But if you look at this, that's capped brood. So how many days old do you think that is? So I mean, it's at least 9 to 10 days old. So that queen started going rampant in end of February. So that's why you really got to watch your food, because they're getting active, they're ready to rock and roll. And carniolans especially, they have a fast buildup. Like they just, when that flips or flips in their head, they're going. And this is when, I keep the condensation barriers on, be very mindful of their food. And some people will use formic acid at this time. Okay, whenever they may not treat as much OA vapor as I do. I hear people with good success using formic acid at this time, because their theory is, okay, if you kill 10% of your bees and you kill your queen, okay, well, you got the rest of the season to make up for it. So I can get it. I don't have experience doing that. And now, here in March, we're back to feeding 3/4 to 1, because there's not much nectar coming in yet. And be mindful that don't feed if the temperatures are below 55. So the bees just won't take it. But like 3/4 to 1 is your best stimulant to kind of, with the pollen, feeding a little sugar syrup to keep them alive, as long as your temperatures are right. It's the best thing that I found to do. I will put out some dry pollen sub too, as an extra boost to them. And I use Ultra Bee. You get that from Man Lake, or even Jason and Hive House down in Shepherdstown. He always carries that. But I put it out, and I kind of do it a cheap way. You can buy the feeders, right? They're like $160. I'm not doing that. I just dump the dry pollen in an empty nuke and just allow the bees to kind of go in and get it and rob it out. So all you got to do is keep the stuff dry. I use PVC, and I'll hang it up. I'll put a cap on, like 4-inch PVC. I'll put a cap on the one end, hang it up in a tree, and dump a bunch of, horizontally, dump a bunch of dry pollen in it. Bees can go in and get it, keeps the rain off it, keeps the stuff dry. There's no real, like, mice don't get into it. They're not going to cause a problem with it. But there's plenty of ways to feed it. But that's really the only pollen supplement I do. I don't really get into the pollen patties that much with the big hives. We do on our queen production, but that's a whole different story. That's not what we're doing here. I'm not saying don't feed pollen patties. It's just I don't really think we have to in our environment. So why spend the money on it? And like I said, condensation barriers are still on. And there's not much to do. Just allow them to build up. Typically, you're not going to have swarming yet in March. The colony is just getting. Now, what I will do in March sometimes is, if you're in a double deep, right? Sometimes the bees are all in the top box. And for some reason, bees don't want to work down, they want to work up. So it's a simple solution. Just flip the boxes around. Like, I'll go around, take the top box, pull the bottom one off, just flip them around and let them now rework it and fill up what they need. So April, it's another tricky month. Like I said, our springs, last April was great, kind of. We did have a few nights in the 40s, which can cause a couple chill brood problems. But April is when you kind of start watching for your swarming, trying to start watching for the bees going, filling out their hive. But it's not quite honey production season yet. Right, so the autumn olive will bloom sometime in mid-April, but autumn olive honey, you get mixed reviews on that too, if you really like it or not. That has kind of an odor to it, an aftertaste to it. What I do with it is, this is when I split. This is when I start making my nukes. You can see all the nukes we're making there. I let the bees, so I'll make my nukes, make my splits out of the top box and put new frames in there. And I'm going to let the bees rebuild on the autumn olive, or the Russian olive, whatever we call it. I let them use that resource, so I don't have to feed, just let nature give it to them, and let them rebuild on that and get ready for the locust flow in mid-May. So the condensation barriers, that's when I usually take them off. There's no need for them from April all the way till September, October. I just take them off, get them out of the way. No feeding is really necessary, especially, so that would be, no feeding is necessary once the autumn olive blooms. Like, once that's on, autumn olive, you'll know it when it's coming in. It's everywhere around here, and when you try to pop this lid off, it'll just be dripping with honey. It's crazy when that stuff starts coming in. So May is the exciting month. This is when the hives, you want them to be at their peak population again. Once you've made your splits, you want them to rebuild, and you want them to, this is when you're playing with that. You want them almost in swarm mode, yet not. You want to keep them there so that they make a lot of honey. So like I said, give or take with the day, but locust trees are going to bloom in mid-May, then your poplars, and this is what we're really trying to make our honey off of. This is the good stuff. And also, this is when swarming always happens. This one picture here, you see them like that corner fence post. One day I pulled up there and there was 5 swarms hanging onto that fence post. That was quite irritating, but it happens. You know, you try to play that game and try to watch for swarming. Swarming is always going to happen. I shouldn't say always, but the highest percentage of happening is going to be between 10 o'clock in the morning and 2 o'clock in the afternoon on days that are 75 degrees and higher. And I pulled up so many yards, and then you pull up and you just see this chaos of bees, and they're swarming. You'll all of a sudden start seeing them ball up on the branch or on one of them fence posts. And all I do is I walk over, shake, put the bees back into a different box and set them up on their own. So the bad thing about swarming, I got my bees back, that's good. But that hive that they came from, they're not gonna make you any honey. Like, you just lost half your bees. They're gonna be rebuilding. So what I typically do is I'll go back to I'll find the hive that they came from, and I'm just gonna make more splits, because that hive's not gonna make me honey anyway. I'm just gonna increase my numbers there again, and let them rebuild on the natural resources that are out there. But it's frustrating when you don't get your bees back. Like, they'll just leave, you'll come back to your hive, and all of a sudden there'll be half as many bees in there, and a young virgin queen that you're hoping gets mated and comes back successfully. But it's part of the game you play. Bees naturally, that's how they reproduce. That's how they create a second colony. They want to do it, but we just try to manage them in a way that they don't leave. So June continues honey production. June's actually kind of a calm month for us, other than chasing swarms if we got to. Hopefully, last year was really bad for us. Seems like we were chasing swarms every day. But like I said earlier, in the western part of the county, basswood trees will really start blooming. I highly recommend it. It's a great honey. So if you miss the locust and poplar flow, you're blessed in the sense that you can get the basswood if you're out on the western part of the county or even further west. And there's more stuff the further out you are. I know if the deeper you are into Appalachia, you can get sourwood trees. That's like a caramel flavored honey, and that's a high delicacy. That's like your highest priced honey. And that's something I've been kind of chasing to find. I kind of know where I can get it at, and I haven't found it yet. I was hoping to find some in Paw Paw, but not yet. But Paw Paw is full of the basswood trees, so I can't complain there. But end of June is when we start pulling our honey. So obviously I'm not going to pull it from any yards that have the basswood trees yet. But yards that I have that on this side of the county or out towards Hedgesville, I'm going to start taking the honey, because they're pretty much done. I kind of want to start getting ready for mite treatment. Your clovers are in full bloom, and like I said, wildflowers all throughout the fields are popping up everywhere. So you can still be making honey through June. It just depends on your mite management, what you want to start doing, and where you are in West Virginia as far as what trees, and if you want to start pulling your honey supers off yet. You can see that truck, everything you see there is just full of honey off of that one yard. So July, all your honey supers should come off. So your basswood flow does not last long. So you can easily miss it. I'd say you only got a 2-week opportunity to get it. So It's not gonna last that long, but just once that's over, I'd say you're good. You can start pulling your honey then. Feeding 1-to-1, and once again, we're back to the beginning, and this is why I say July is when the beekeeper's calendar starts. Now we just made it through the swarm season. We made it through honey production season. Now we're starting over. Now we got to start getting our colonies ready for winter time again, and it's always going to have to start with the mites, because you're never not going to have mites. They're going to be there. You have to do something about them. And there's all kinds of studies out there that they're constantly doing about how to keep them from spiking, to kind of keep them at a low rate, because the mites, I think they can reproduce every 15 days. So, and bees are 21 days. So you can see, like, during this season of honey production, the mites they're starting to gain traction. And you can't have, formic acid you can have on with honey supers, but none of the other ones you can. So if you want to extract your honey, you can't have your mite treatments in there, because there'll be residues of it in your honey, and you don't want to be eating that. I put them on, so like I said, May 12th, May 13th, that's give or take, is when your locust trees are going to start blooming. And so I try to put it on a number of days before that. 2 or 3 days, when you're trying to get around to 800 colonies, you're playing your week out to try to get your honey supers on ahead of time. But honey production, it's another game, right? Like you're playing with the bees, you're trying to get them to be so super big and just time things out just right, and some beekeepers really get into, they'll start counting down the days when all this brood's gonna hatch and try to time that with the honey flow. And they'll pack these boxes out with brood, by taking resources from other hives and just layering it up and counting down the days to try to match up with the nectar flow. And when it booms, they got all these honey supers on, quick turnaround honey production. I don't get into it that much. It's a lot of work. And I've tried it in the past and I got it wrong. I ended up getting like rainy days when the locust trees bloomed and I got all these bees, I got nothing to do. We're just gonna run out of room and leave. So I tried to, and I don't mess with queen excluders a lot either. That's another thing that's gonna be beekeeper specific on if you want to or not. So, and what I mean by that is when you have your double deeps, and that's your hive body, guys will put a queen excluder on top of that to not allow the queen to get to your honey supers. Because, what'll happen is the queen will get up in there, lay a bunch of eggs, and you're not putting honey where you want honey. Now the honey's down low, or you're trying to make it right so you can extract it all. But the problem with that is, if the queen does run out of room, I'd rather them stay and lose a couple frames of honey than them leave by swarming, because that queen exclude, it's not when the bees run out of room, it's when the queen runs out of room, if that makes sense. So when that queen feels like she has nowhere to go to lay an egg, well, boom, they're in swarm mode. She's gonna put off that pheromone, and now they're gonna go in the next 2 weeks. They're gonna leave, so you're gonna lose your bees. I will set them up, try to. Now, it's never always foolproof, but as I'm going around putting my honey supers on, I'm gonna go around and shake bees down. And what I mean by that is I'll take an empty box and I'll put it on top of this one, and I'll take bees out of the top box and I'll start shaking them down. Get them down low. And the reason why I'm shaking them is because I'm not looking through every frame for the queen. Now, if I pull a frame out and boom, there's the queen, okay, I'll put her down, I'm done. I just get that queen down low with some empty frames or empty drawn out frames that give her space, then put them back on top, then put my honey supers on. Does that make sense?
And she won't go up into the honey.
Oh, she will eventually. This depends on how long, I allow them honey supers to go on. So I try to be pretty diligent about trying to pull off at certain flows and then readjust and then do it, put more honey supers on. Not every hive gets that treatment. I try to give that treatment everywhere, but sometimes honey supers are on for too long and the queen does get up into there and it just kind of is what it is. At that point, it's not like anything's wrong, you know. You just got some frames you can't extract then, and kind of got ugly frames too. I don't mess with it. I've done, you know, screening. I've done, you know, different pieces of wood across, you know, making it smaller. I haven't noticed anything different. The only thing, you know, if, you know, take me back to when I had 5 to 10 hives, yeah, I'm putting mouse guards in front of every one of them because I don't want them getting in there and chewing up my wax. But I'm not doing it to 800. So, but to say it does not affect them, you know, with that cold air getting in, it doesn't do anything, in my opinion, that it's worth doing. I don't insulate my hives. The only thing, this is what you see, other than it being 2 deeps. That's how every one of my hives look right now and all winter long.
Do you use screen bottom boards or solid?
I don't like the screens. And so the screens came about, that was like another mite management idea. And, you know, for that, when the bees would, you know, knock the mites off the bodies, the mites would fall out of the hive. In my mind, the screen bottom boards cause more problems than they do help. So I've played with them a little bit, and I think I threw them away a month later and said, nope. So I don't have much experience with them, but I don't recommend them. I mean, most of the old timers, they're still using the solid bottom boards, and that's what I found to work the best. But I'm not saying don't use them, but I don't get into it. And especially, it's not a good enough mite management to say that that's your mite management. It's not enough. But once again, it's my opinion. You know, you could get bees coming up out of Georgia or wherever where every little bit helps. So sometimes I can contradict myself because I always say, what's going to make me 1% better at the mite management game or at making my colonies just 1% healthier? And maybe that's it. Maybe I should look into it, but right now I don't bother with it. So if the colony dies off,
Yeah.
the box just sits like this all winter long. That way air can move through it and mice aren't going to build a nest up in it. And the bees, so like other hives will rob it out. It'll be totally empty comb. They'll, you know, if there's honey in there, or pollen, they'll take it all, take it back to their hives. And if the weather starts getting warm again and you still don't have bees in it, it'll keep the wax moths off of it. So the wax moths will destroy your comb too, but that's all you got to do. Is just leave it in the sun, let the air move through it, and your box is going to be totally fine. So I know some people get into taking the frames out, freezing them to kill off any possible germs that are in there. But if your hive died in the wintertime, it's already cold. You're already freezing it. So that's kind of my theory. I don't get into doing nothing too extravagant. And I've got no science behind it, but I've noticed when I started using oxalic acid vapor, I stopped having as many brood problems, meaning like stone brood, chalk brood. Well, chalk brood it can come in the spring regardless because of the cold weather, but having it later in the year, it seems like oxalic acid vapor helped clean up my comb a lot. But regardless, when your comb starts getting 5 years old and plus, still, scrape it off, sell it off, something. You know, you want your comb rotated. You want to keep clean comb in there. Because, I mean, who knows what they're picking up, you know. I mean, they say herbicides don't really have an effect on bees, but if the bee brings an herbicide home and it's in the comb and you're trying to raise brood in it, it can't be good. So, you know, think about that with wax absorbing everything. You don't want, you know, rotate your wax out. Definitely. No. So package bees, even though they typically come out of Georgia. So even though you might buy them from a guy up here, he's going down to Georgia to get them. And I've gone back and forth on if I ever want to get into that, but right now my reason for not getting into that is the reason why the mites are so bad is because southern bees keep coming up here. And it's kind of irritating because the South, Georgia, Florida, Texas, all them southern states, they have mites way worse than us. And when you can isolate our bees up here, our mite levels are not near as bad. Where like guys down there, they'll be treating 15, 16 times a year, and the bees live with Amitraz in the boxes. We don't have to do that, and I don't ever want it to get that bad. But so like I got other yards that it was like year after year, the mite levels were so low. I didn't hardly have to do much at all. I could just keep it simple, organic treatments, and everything was under control. But then all of a sudden, one year, I get into it. I'm, breaking open the drone comb, and I see 9 mites on one. What happened? Well, a neighbor down the road got some bees, and he got a package. They're full of, they're full of mites. So I'm trying to educate and help our area by like, hey, we're just going to stay right here, isolate it, try to keep clean bees. But you might get clean bees. I don't know, but that's just where the majority of the problems are coming from right now. And then you get Africanized strains too from down south as well. So you never really know what you're getting. So I stick with the nukes. The reason why I kind of wanted to dabble in it is because it is a cheaper option for people than a nuke is, but we're just sticking with nukes.